Hmm.
It says message is now streaming live on Facebook.
Does it?
It says meeting is now streaming live on Facebook on my screen.
That's comforting.
Yeah, it says
Maybe
live on,
something is
says
happening.
live on Facebook.
Oh. Well, maybe I was successful.
In TV, we call this a live open.
There you go. There you go.
We all should be in front of bookshelves right now. I feel like David has the best view.
Right.
But... All right.
I always judge online, or I mean, TV people by the books I can read the spines of on their show. You didn't really read that, did you?
That has been something I've been enjoying, is seeing everybody's homes, but then I feel like I'm getting really close to the screen because I'm trying to do just that, like see what
I've done
judge you. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, Grace, I'm sure will tell us if it's not working, so we can go ahead and get started. So.
Okay.
Welcome everyone who's tuning in on Facebook Live. This is the next installment of Dreamers and Doers. We have David Giffels and Dominic Moore-Dunson with us here today. And I can tell you, you're in for a great conversation and a wonderful way to spend your lunch hour here today. I want to thank Akron Community Foundation and Knight Foundation for supporting this effort to share and connect during strange and turbulent times. And it's more important now than ever to have the way of connecting to humanity and connecting to one another. And so I'm grateful that Dominic and David are joining us on this journey today. So gentlemen, welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
One thing that quickly emerged from our conversations as we were meeting, and this is the first time you have not met in person, so you are just internet friends, is that true?
That's right.
Hi, internet friend.
So one of the things that I really loved was it seemed to be this instant connection around narrative and place, and you're both people who deeply love Akron. You have different stories of experiencing Akron, but the one thing that I think comes through in both of your work, Dominic as a choreographer and certainly David as an author, is this love of place and importance of place. And I wanted to just give you a moment to maybe share how that started for you. How did Akron, or how does Akron still continue to be this important part of your work and your art as an artist?
Dominic,
So yeah, I mean, my whole dancing life has been in Akron, right? Except for the couple of years that I lived in San Antonio with my mom, who's in the Air Force, where, when I say dancing life, I'm not necessarily talking about my training dancing, but my dancing life as in being in my physical body and moving that body in such a way that's full of expression. So besides the 2 to 3 years I was in San Antonio, Texas, the rest of my dancing life has been here. And it's a place where I've been able to go through a school system dancing from middle school through high school. I attended University of Akron for a bit of time. And Akron is a place where I've had the space and the time to figure out what it means for me to express through physical motion as it connects to things that I care about in life. And I really appreciate it because at the same time I'm doing that, I can also have a family. I can also have a home and live in a house as opposed to a studio apartment somewhere in New York City. And that's really important to me, right? We often know that Akron is a place for family. And you can have a full high quality career and a family at the same time here in Akron. That's a place I want to be.
So, Nicole, you're muted.
It's probably for the best, but I was going to say Dominic has a rapidly expanding family, so we're very happy for you and Ashley and your
maybe in August.
New arrival. Yep.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, I'm actually in the baby's room right now.
Are you?
Very nice.
Yeah,
Good
thank
call. Yeah, my experience of Akron is as much about place as it is about time, because I sort of came of age as part of the first generation in Rust Belt cities that never knew the city as a thriving industrial place that only aftermath. And so at first I wasn't consciously aware, but definitely intrigued and fascinated by especially the downtown that I knew when I first started exploring my city as abandoned, but clearly filled with architecture and a spirit of something that had been there, and it fascinated me. It felt like this sort of post-apocalyptic playground, like all these buildings, all this possibility of what you could do in these empty spaces, because artists are always drawn to voids, and to the ruin of the previous culture, and so I was just just sort of like indulged myself in that when I was a student at the University of Akron. I'd walk downtown and just you could do whatever you wanted. And then when I started, it found its way into my writing organically then, and I've been kind of writing about that story outward, really kind of for my whole writing life. Not only what it was then, but how cities like ours evolve. How we, it's always two steps forward, one step back. It's always a grind, and that's become the definition of us culturally more than anything else. Is this understanding that we have to work. Nothing's going to come easy. LeBron James said it, and it's so true. Everything is earned, nothing is given, and that's kind of the narrative that I feel continuing here. It's the right size city, that it's a city, but you can kind of see how it works because it's not so vast that you can't see how things function as a system. And I find that really fascinating.
Well, we were visiting before, and I was unsuccessfully trying to navigate Facebook Live. David, you made this comment about the artist as a journalist, which I found really compelling and really true, and especially in times like this, how we interpret our world and how we document it. I think as artists, that's just, it's fascinating to me, and it feels like what you were describing, David, is that you were capturing not only the city, but the city at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone who does creative work is taking what is the chaos of any moment or experience and creating some kind of order or meaning for it. So even, like every moment of our life, as James Joyce tried to reflect, is just chaos. It's everything, even as we're talking right now, some little part of my mind is thinking about dinner tonight. Some other part of my mind is remembering something that happened 10 years ago. That's what human experience is. And so that's the moment. And the journalist's job is to take the moment and tell its story. So the artist gets to do that in a much broader way, but that's still what we're doing. So whether the moment is a moment of calm and beauty, or whether the moment is a moment like the one we're in right now, which is overtly chaotic, it's not only our instinct, it's our responsibility, I think, to give whatever meaning that we can find, or whatever order that we can find, or to put it into a context that's not the chaos that it presents.
Yeah, and inside that, there's just, when you're trying to create a level of order, that's where the artistic process is, right? The artistic process is inside of trying to sift through what all of these things mean to the world, but also what they mean to you. I was listening to a podcast, and this artist said that part of the artistic process for her was digging deep enough into your individual self and going far enough down that you find the universal. So in times like these, especially what's happening in our country right now over the last week or so, that's kind of where I've been just mentally, like watching the world around me and then digging deep into myself and trying to figure out what's in there, right? Because there's as a dancer and a choreographer, you learn as you get older that our life experiences are stored in our body and in our muscles, and that it can actually be separate from what your brain is thinking at any given time. So you don't just spend time thinking, you spend time feeling. Like, what does your body feel like when people tell you something about your people group that doesn't feel good, that feels unfair? What does it feel like when you're watching, people who look like you die on camera? Like, you store all of those narratives and all those feelings in your body, and then takes an abundant amount of time to dig deep into those muscles to figure out what it is you have to say about that moment. Because, you just have to trust that the narrative that you have to tell about yourself is also universal, right? It's not just individual and singular unto yourself. And so while we're doing this work as artists, as being journalists, there's a bit of fear that happens naturally, because you're wondering half the time if anybody will care what you have to say, right? But it's our duty, and it's not a duty connected to success, which is a thing that I've been wrapping my head around a lot, that my job is to see the world, interpret the world, spit it out a different way from a different angle, to mobilize people, to raise awareness for people, and not necessarily worry about the worldly success that comes with doing that work.
It's interesting what you said about the way that the personal, when you generate it the way it's supposed to be generated. Hang on, I just lost my screen again. It becomes universal, because that's the thing is true of writing about place. Eudora Welty said, the American novelist said, to know one place well is to know all places better. And Adam Gopnik, the great New Yorker writer, said, the only way to write about the world is to write about a world, the world that we know best, our place. And it's really true. I mean, one thing that I've come to understand in writing about my place is that its value is not, nobody's interested in reading about Akron, Ohio. Sorry, but they're interested in reading about a place that reflects a larger narrative. And so and there are all kinds of larger narratives here. And not just that we have a version of events that other people have seen in other places, but that we have an authenticity and a particular character that we can, that can reflect the way another city that's very different from ours can understand itself. Mm-hmm. Tom Wolfe said that cities are alive with moral character. He thinks writing about cities, those should be our subjects, because it's true. I mean, they tell the story of a time
Right.
in unique ways.
It's interesting. Something you struck me that said this, I never thought about this before, but place. I spend a great deal of my time making work about place, but my place happens to be inside of my skin.
Right.
So we have place as in where we live in the city, but we have the place of being in our own bodies, and how our own bodies are interpreted unto ourselves as they're interpreted by other people. Questions I think we all ask to some degree is, do we belong here? Do I belong here? Living in a city where we are desperately trying to get the population up, there's generations of Akronites who ask at some point, do I belong here? There's generations of different people groups who ask about the country. Do I belong here? Do they want me here? Do I have a place here? Do I have a place in my own body? And am I proud of the place that I have? Is something I never thought about until just now, which is just a really something for me to take in after this and just as I move forward. But I think the ability to look at place inwardly as much as outwardly is something to think about for all of us.
Yeah, what we're talking about is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
For you to write your individual story in a generous way, to tell the story of your body in a generous way that becomes universal, or to tell the story of a place in a way that becomes universal, it takes that generosity, that understanding of the other, who's invisible. The audience member is invisible when you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to, and so if you're doing it well, you're creating that connection before it exists. And that's empathy. And so, you know, so to watch a man with a knee on his neck call for his mother in his dying breath, if you can put yourself into your own body well enough to understand your own body, and then you can allow yourself to put yourself into his body, imagination, that it's a form of art and a form of empathy.
Yeah. And even to that, just the ability to, what does it mean to write your own story, right? Like, what does it mean to have the exercise of, I'm going to sit down with a piece of paper. You might not be a writer, but write your narrative from your perspective. And then what is it like to write your narrative from somebody else's perspective, right? And what is the difference? I think you can figure out a lot about your personal narrative through an exercise like that.
That's a great idea. Because the problem with personal narrative is that it always risks being inward.
Mm-hmm.
This is important because it happened to me. And the value of personal narrative has the opposite dynamic, is written outward.
Right.
This happened to me. I'm sharing it so maybe you can understand yourself better because something has happened to you. But to think about, to change that perspective and think about how would somebody else be telling my story,
mm-hmm.
is electric. I mean, it's dangerous too. Like,
yeah, it's incredibly dangerous.
You have to stop and wait. I thought I was cool. And then it's like, wait, I guess if I, it's kind of the way we, as soon as we look into a mirror, we rearrange our expression.
Mm-hmm.
We see what we want to see, just
right.
And we don't like it when we get somebody else's view.
Yeah, I mean, the mirror thing is interesting, right? Because like, if you actually really look at a mirror, you realize that you're actually not seeing what everybody else sees. You're seeing a reflection. So the only way you can see yourself is through other people. Like you get your understanding of yourself through everything around you, because you can't see yourself literally or figuratively. Something about this idea of how somebody else writes your narrative makes me think of, it's dangerous because you suddenly have to ask the question, who is writing your narrative then? Like, who is the person that you're allowing to write that narrative about you? And as we're watching cities burn, and as we're coming face to face with the original sin of America that started in 1619, I think the question that's starting to be asked just abroad is, who wrote this narrative, right? Who wrote these stories? What stories are missing? Whose stories are missing? Why are they missing? And it seems like a lot of people, especially white people, are waking up to that for the first time, questioning like, wait a minute, I didn't know about X or Y or Z.
Right.
I had an interesting moment happen on May 31st because it was the 99-year anniversary of the Tulsa race riot massacres in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Greenville in Tulsa was a community in Tulsa. It was called Black Wall Street because it held millionaires. They had a whole entire Black economy that was vibrant unto itself. But in 1921, that was seen as defiance to white culture. So what happened on that day was white members of Tulsa came and rioted and killed 300 people and left almost 6,000 homeless. And all of a sudden, the narrative of Black Wall Street has dissipated, and most of us have never heard about it, right? So then so there's this narrative, right? And as you learn about that, you start saying like, I wonder how much that's connected to this, like, it feels like almost generational economic development issues in the Black community. Because if we did it once and then it was taken away from us, and also the narrative was taken away from us, why would we try again, right? And so some of the work that I've done and I've made is based in this idea of what happens when your narrative feels so created by other people. It makes you kind of be conservative about trying to live prosperly prosperity as people, because there's fear there, because you don't have ownership over your own narrative on national level. It just reminds me of like, who's writing these narratives is a question that's starting to happen. And I'm interested to see how stories, how artwork changes as those questions keep getting asked on a deeper level.
Yeah, I mean, as an English professor and a creative writing professor, I'm seeing, I've been teaching for a decade, and within that decade, I've seen a greater and greater urgency on the part of students to want to see the stories told by other than white males.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been going on for a long time, but it seems to me that it's a louder and louder cry for proper diversity and proper reflection of the stories that are told. And it makes me think a lot about my role in the stories that I've told. Because, like this week, I'm thinking, is it my place to protest? Because this is not my, I know how I feel, and I know that I feel outrage. But how is my, how righteous am I supposed to be or allowed to be without sort of usurping somebody else's more direct relationship to this event or to like this?
Right, because I mean, what you're talking about, right, is like who gets to be the central figure of a tale, the central figure of a story, and how do you essentially, like, how do you be the sidekick to the central character without taking that role when historically people who are like you have always been the central character, right? Like, what does that mean? And I think what's hard is at the moment there's no answer, right? There's no easy answer for that conversation, but having conversation, right? I think that's the easiest answer, is to have a conversation about that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I think those can be such hard conversations for people to start. I think that's some of the value of moments like this that are happening across the country, is that coming together to ask those questions that we as white people are usually too afraid to ask. And I don't know, I appreciate that, especially in Akron right now, that there's a space for those conversations. And I think I'm certainly compelled and wanting to provide more of those spaces as appropriate for the arts community, because I do think that artists are those people who are feeling the pressure of creating right now. And I worry sometimes that, these, from a pandemic to the political climate to the horrific events of the past week, but this spring, I think sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to create or to work harder or to make. And I don't know, I wonder, has it been hard for you as artists to make right now, to create, because of absorbing and putting that back out? Do you think that's going to come later? Or has this been a time where you've been inspired to make work?
Go ahead, Tom.
For me, I honestly realized a couple weeks ago when Ahmaud Arbery was murdered, that I hadn't been really thinking about making before then. In that moment, I started feeling pressure like I was supposed to. And then I decided that, like, this is the moment where art comes second. And me as a Black man and experiencing this climate in this world and figuring out where I fit inside of this, I need to take care of that first and not feel the pressure to create order so suddenly. Because, I guess I question, like, if we always create order so fast, will we ever dig up enough stuff to get to the root of the issue? Right? If we keep piling more artwork on top of the same issues, are we leaving the space for us as human beings to get down to the nitty gritty of it all, see the ugliest part first, and then start the process of making artwork that begins to heal that thing, that begins to open that thing up in a way that can actually help people. So I've had my foot totally off the pedal, and I'm just experiencing, I'm just figuring out where I can fit in, and I'm figuring out what does it mean. Like, you know, I hate to say it, but it was a horrific thing that was done to George Floyd, but this also isn't the first video we've ever seen, right? So at the moment, it feels a bit trendy to be outraged about this thing. Now, in saying that, it feels different this time. I'm not sure why it's any different, but it feels really different. But we have time to make, because this is an evergreen topic that some folks are treating as trendy. So I don't have to worry about making right now inside of the trend of the moment, because I've been experiencing this way before our community and our world has awakened to it, and I'm going to experience it way after, and so will everyone who looks like me. So I have the time to keep digging and keep unfolding until we get to the root of the issue and trying to point to that. So I've taken that pressure off myself.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. Did you go to any of the protests, Dominic?
I did not, and the only reason I didn't was because my wife is pregnant. You know, we got 10 weeks left, and with COVID, COVID isn't over. You know,
Yeah.
Public service announcement. It's not over, so I got to make sure that I take care of my home with this, you know, biracial, but will be seen as a little Black child first.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard enough when they get here, so I need to make sure I take care of them first.
How did COVID become the second worst thing that's going on? You know?
Right.
That's nuts. Man, what you just said, because, you know, I hate to even think about this, but I don't think any of us is going to be surprised if this all happens again in 2 years, you know, a shooting like that. I wrote, there's a chapter in my book that's coming out in August about, it is partly about Cincinnati and almost, you know, by the playbook version of what happened with George Floyd after the shooting of Timothy Thomas, an unarmed 19-year-old Black man shot by a white cop. And, you know, the reason I wanted to write about it is because Cincinnati didn't just react with the outrage. They created a document called the Collaborative Agreement, and it was a document that directly addressed certain police policies, certain ways that the community operates, and it was this sort of really well thought out list, almost like this is how we are changing in a tangible, practical ways to try to do better. And Cincinnati's leaders have been called on in these events since then to come and present the collaborative agreement and help people understand how they found at least the next step of meaning. That's narrative, you know. They've taken what happened, they've taken information and turned it into meaning, and then they communicate that meaning to an audience who can, you know, who can reflect their own version of experience, another experience. That's what literature is. And I wonder what's going to be, you know, the collaborative agreement that comes out of this. I don't know. I feel like something's going to happen that's going to be substantial, so that when it happens again, I hate to say when, but when it happens again, that it won't, that it can't just be another version of the same.
Right. So this last thing you said just can't be another version. I was listening to a sermon, and it's a pastor that I follow, and he said this phrase that I've been thinking about for 4 weeks. Truth doesn't have variations. And this idea that, like, what is the truth about a moment? What is the truth about, you know, racism as a structure and how it acts as a bedrock to American society, right? I think of racism as like the soil that was laid across America, and then the blood of Black people is what is the water for that soil. So everything that grows out of it is always going to have this bend that's connected to this original sin, right? And when you talk about, so it doesn't happen again and just another variation, I think what you're saying by having some kind of substantive document, something that we can point to, something that we can keep anyone accountable to, it creates a way where we can't have another variation because we have this agreed upon truth that we decide this is what it is and this is what it isn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can't end American racism.
Right.
You can understand that it exists and you can operate as a decent person within it. But yeah, it's like you say, it's the original sin.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go away.
Right.
It's interesting. I mean, Akron's and Summit County's leaders are talking about to declare racism as a public health dilemma.
Yeah.
Because that's new language. I mean, that's
so different.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I was thinking this morning about President Obama came out with a statement a couple of days ago, and he talked about this idea of mobilizing and organizing. And he talked about mobilizing in the sense of raising awareness. To mobilize people is to raise awareness, get people, off their seats to kind of do things. But after mobilizing, there has to be organizing. So then we get to the polls and we organize in that way. We gather people to actually make change. There's raising awareness and there's makes change. I think as artists, we spend a lot of time in that raising awareness piece. I'm starting to question for myself, is that enough for me? Do I have the capacity? I know that I have the capacity. Do I want to start to learn how to now organize as well? Help people bring awareness by making art, but when the time comes right, help organize them so we can actually make change happen. And I'm beginning to wonder, like, where is our place as artists when it comes to not just raising awareness, but really getting people to move their feet toward something different.
You said you're not ready to create about this, that you need to feel the rawness of it for now. I think that there has, in every volatile era, there has been art that comes out of it that I hate to say this, but the more popular it becomes, the more useful it is. So that, like a film like Schindler's List continue to advance past a horrific event, just to choose one, and lots of people saw it. So, there are going to be all kinds of narratives and images that are going to be about the pandemic that are going to start appearing in the forum, in the coming months. And there are going to be images and narratives about George Floyd that are going to start to appear. What will they be? I don't know what they'll be. So I feel like these moments are inspirational, even though that seems like the wrong word, because they're so heated, they're so elevated, that it elevates the things in you that are good as well as the things that are bad. It elevates anger, but it also elevates expression. And when your instinct as a choreographer and as a dancer, when your instinct is to communicate with your body, I'm sure at some point, and I hope so, that your body's going to tell you what it wants to do with this. I wonder, do you have even an inkling, just a shred of feeling that corresponds to dance?
Yeah, I mean, I have, and it's funny because, again, like, to me, this conversation we're having right now is an evergreen topic. Like, it's as fiery to me right now as it is on any regular Tuesday, right? So I've already had this idea in my head. When things like this happen and there's all this attention around it, or even like the small things that you see through like social media every day that pertain to the mistreatment of Black people in this country, there's this dualism that you go through. W.E.B. Du Bois talks about double consciousness. This idea that to be Black is to have two souls, two intellects, two emotions, two striving bodies, one being American, one being Black or Negro, and that they go and they're like this at all times. So I've taken that idea and thought about how, yes, that is true, but there's a parallel of that conversation of being double conscious, having these double consciousness when it comes to how do we as Black people fight this fight, right? It's the revolutionary versus respectability politics. It's you are Malcolm X and Martin Luther King at the same time. And what do you do when, you know, you see things like burning buildings and shops going aflame, and you know that on one end, that's not helping, and peaceful protest helps because we saw Martin Luther King do it, but we also know he got murdered. And there's the other part of you who's like, the whole system's messed up, burn the entire thing to the ground. So what do you do when, like, inside of your one body, your one soul, you have these two combating instances all the time? So when you walk around every day, you're fighting that fight that most people can't see.
Yeah.
What is that experience like? So it's a thing that it's going to be created when it comes out. I don't know. But it's something that I know that, and again, that's my individual story, but there's universal underneath that, right? Like we talk about this idea of, and I'm going to forget the name of these Greek mythology, but there's idea there's two gods, one of order, one of chaos. Mm-hmm. And life is about finding the balance between order and chaos at all times. And that's what being Black feels like on the inside. You're trying to find a balance between kind of getting into the nooks and the crannies of the system to try to change it from the inside, or just trying to burn the whole damn thing down from the outside. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what's like in my head, in my body. And I'm just kind of like, I need to let it simmer. I need to let it kind of like marinate for a little while. And I'm not worried about I'm not worried about it coming out. I'm not worried about the quality of it. It's going to be high quality. It's going to be good, but I need to let it really marinate at the moment, because there's too much going on at the moment to be able to make something happen out of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you would be so well served and well challenged to try to make white America understand that duality, because it's hard for someone who even somebody who does have empathy and who is educated about all of American history, still to be able to feel that sort of primal sort of internal duality. There's I think the most powerful line in Quentin Tarantino's movie Django Unchained happens after Django is traveling around. He's a Black former slave traveling around with a German they're trying to do good. Mm-hmm. And a white slave owner orders a Black slave to be ripped to shreds by dogs, and they watch this happen. And Django watches it with a straight face, and his white German friend looks queasy, and the cruel slave owner turns to Django and he says, your friend looks a little green at the gills or whatever, and Django just says, well, he's not American. And what is, Americans understand that this is what we do, and somebody who doesn't have that experience. So how do you get people to feel that in the moment in a movie, but to continue to be able to understand the irony of that line? I mean, look at the irony of the image that we have right now, and you've probably seen it on Facebook, of Colin Kaepernick on a knee.
Oh my God!
And the same pose held by the cop. Yeah. And the levels of irony in those two juxtaposed images are telling. And I guarantee you that people who are seeing that on Facebook right now are more angry at Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's the thing, right? It's your job. Like the role is of the artist is, I was struck when you said like taking information and turning it into meaning.
Hmm.
How do you take that information of that image and turn it into meaning for someone who can't see the meaning in the irony so obviously that it is to us? Right? Like how do you do that? How do you find a way to create in a way where you can create empathy in other people? But the thing about creating in a way to help people empathize is sometimes I struggle as a creator who is Black, that, and this is just a really honest moment, that I have to spend time showing people our humanity, right? That like we have this dual thing going on and all that kind of stuff, but like, so do y'all. You know what I mean? Like it should be obvious that we would have something there, and that because we're humans. So like you find yourself spending a lot of time in your artwork sometimes because, like, if we're honest, you go to a theater, most of the people who are going to show up are white. So you're going to spend a lot of time feeling like you're educating people on your humanity, as opposed to just being able to have just a real conversation about what's going on. It's not even feeling pressure. It's just what ends up happening, right? Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
I think it's so interesting that as white people, we're so comfortable putting that responsibility on you and on others, as if that is what it should be. Yeah.
And here, I mean, here's what I think is just a point with all of this. Information into meaning comes out of experiences. The more we can get people to look at their personal narratives and question their experiences, question who gave them those experiences, what experiences were they not privy to, maybe because of where they grew up or maybe because how they were raised. And then when you go to a show, when you read a book, because you figured out a way to change your experiences, it shifted your narrative. So your ability to connect people that are different than you, the empathy thing will be there even more because you've changed your experiences. And the idea of questioning your narrative comes with a lot of unpacking that can feel personally hurtful, I think, right? Because what happens when you start unpacking your narrative and all of a sudden you're having to question people you love, like your parents or your grandparents? Or what happens when you have to start questioning your husband or wife? Or what happens when you have to start questioning the, not necessarily intention, but the actions of those you love, right? It feels like you are breaking down the foundations of your own identity by questioning your narrative. And now you're in a place of fear because you're asking, who am I? What is my place in this body now? What is my role and my identity in relation to the place in which I grew up, right? So it's all connected in that way.
Yeah, just listening to you, I'm inspired to be thinking about this in a different way, which is that I've, as a white writer, and I think white writers in general, I think have a responsibility to express our ignorance, even those of the most enlightened and maybe, to still understand that at some point, no, you can't intellectualize yourself into feeling your body.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's that book, Black Like Me. I can't think of the author's name. It's right behind it. It's like
grab it, David.
But this is during the civil rights era. It's a work of nonfiction. A white writer actually underwent this. He took these chemicals that darkened his skin enough that he looked African American, and then he used a little bit of some makeup to fully enhance it. And he went traveling around the South as a Black man, and he wrote this really incredible and also controversial account of this. and that's as close as he could get to feeling black skin is like, but his skin was white. He could wash it off.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to me, I mean, I already know this about the essay, which is my main form. The word essay in French translates to the verb to try. And I love to think about essays that way, as not being written toward an answer, but being written to try. And to try almost always implies to fail. And to me, like, one of the most powerful rhetorical elements in the essay is the question. Questions have a really strong energy in a piece of writing. But I think the strongest questions are the ones that you don't know the answer to. So, like, does God exist? Like, that question has more power as a mystery than it has if I propose an answer. And so if I can take this question, can I understand what it is? Ultimately, can I understand what it is to be a Black American? And either confront, the difficult truth that I can't, even as I would want to, or to deepen the question, which is really what literature should do. Literature shouldn't be finding the answers. And any piece of literature that it's like it finds the neat answer is weaker than the one that acknowledges that the mystery has been deepened and not solved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the answer is the same way. I think all really good art does the same thing, right? Like, I was a part of the project where Nick Cave came to Akron Art Museum, and during the rehearsals, one of the things he said about making art was, all you're doing is asking another question. Every time you make something new, you're just asking another question. And I love this idea that essay means to try, because I don't know if anyone's, maybe I'm totally wrong with this, but I'm not sure people are expecting us to have answers. I'm not sure as artists, when they come in to watch what we're doing or read the book, unless you're like making a how-to book, right? I'm not sure people are saying, I'm going to read this to get the answers. And if they are, what kind of education haven't we given them to know that's not why you do that, right? Part of the journey is you going through that work to do that, not just looking for somebody else to provide you an answer, which is why we can't give people answers, because we can't spoon feed people things that we know they could find them themselves with that guidance of more questions, right? We can help shape their journey, but we can't decide the path of their journeys, And I think that when, I'm making dances, as I continue to make dance or any mode of art making in my life, or teaching or anything, I think that's part of what I'm committed to, especially when it's around this conversation of race. Asking questions, but asking the hard questions that create accountability, right? Like the questions, because you can do that in art, you can ask that hard question in a work, in an essay, in a piece of theater, dance, music, whatever it is, that will ask a really difficult question that will make an audience member or reader sit back and decide, like, maybe I need to begin the journey or continue the journey or whatever it is. So it's always like almost like a spark to get somebody to like move to the next stage of whatever it is you're talking about. In this instance, I'm referring to race. And I think as an artist, I think it should be okay that you're asking yourself the question, right? That you're allowing yourself to continue the journey.
Right.
Because you're just, like you say, you're going to end up asking deeper questions that are going to make you do more work. And all those things apply the willingness to then learn so that you can get to the next question. And I think my biggest concern about our country when it comes to race specifically, but really anything, is, are we willing to learn as soon as we feel like we hit a plateau of understanding?
Right. Yeah.
That is a really, I'm just going to take a minute and write that down. Continue, David.
No, it's, as you were talking, I was thinking, because, as a writer, I haven't thought about writing about this incident yet, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And when so I'm thinking, how am I thinking about it as a writer? And usually what happens is when something's beginning its very early germination, a phrase will start to work, and that phrase will be the beginning point. And so I was like, what has been working on that part of my brain? And it's just the question why. I mean, this is completely raw, open question why. Every time I watch that video, I just keep asking why, like why aren't you stopping? Why are you doing this in the first place? Why are they standing there watching? Why isn't, just this question why? And so it's a very early, very primal thing that if I were to sit down, because I never know what I think about anything I write. Yeah. And usually I find out how little I know.
Yeah.
And then I can really dig in. I want to ask you, like, do you have an early, just sort of spontaneous movement as a choreographer that seems that's there?
Yeah. I'm going to describe qualities as opposed to actual physical movement that like just holds firm with me. I'm gonna go back to this idea of this dualism. There's a book by a woman named Kekla Magoon called The Rock and the River. And I actually read that book over quarantine. And I read that before all of this happened. And this idea had already been in my head. And that's the moment I realized I knew exactly what to do. I just need to give it time to marinate, like I said, because it's a story about a young boy and his older brother who are sons of a civil rights leader, and their dad is a good friend of Martin Luther King. Spoiler alert, the son ends up being upset with the dad because he's still watching his friends be killed and get beat up. And, his dad is very much inside of the school of Martin Luther King. The older brother joins the Black Panthers. So now you have this story from the younger brother's perspective about, I have a brother who I love who's a Black Panther, and my dad who is very much in the school of Martin Luther King, and trying to figure out, where do I land with both of these people that I love? And at the end of the book, the author talks about this, I think she said it was like an African proverb or something like that, but there's a man who goes to the edge of a river and asks the gods, I want to live forever. And they say, you can be a rock or you can be a river, but you can't be both. And it struck me, and I was like, that's kind of how it feels, that you have to be all of this or all of this, and you can't be both, because when you are in that side of that both, where my life is, they're just clashing with each other. So to almost live forever peacefully, you have to choose one or the other. So I'm thinking about, like, physically, what does it mean to be a rock? Like, physically, what does it mean to have all these movements that are really like jolting and heavy, and on stage very grounding, and that give people a sense of like the power of being a rock, the power of that stillness, but also maybe the strong-headedness of not wanting to move from your ideals. But also, what does it mean to be a river? What does it mean to be something that flows? What does it mean to be something that can get in the nooks of crannies and things and bring life in that way? What does it mean to be a river? The only reason it's a river is because it's controlled by land, outside banks. Because if that wasn't it would just be a lake or an ocean or whatever it is, right? So it's the fact that, like, because what I want to get away from is the idea that, oh, Malcolm was wrong and Martin was right, just because we have a statue of him in Washington, D.C. Because even Martin Luther King at the end of his life realized that there were dark sides to integration, right? The idea that the Black economy basically folded as soon as we became integrated. And he didn't see that coming, right? So what does it mean to be this river that's like flowing, that's beautiful and can be dangerous, but knowing that it is controlled by another source to be able to move forward? So what is it like to have that kind of fluid motion, but to be constrained? What does it mean to be a rock? And what does it mean when the rock is the thing that's letting the river be able to go forward?
Right.
So like those are kind of things that are in my head about like those qualities and how those things are different and how does the body do both those things. And inside of that, because I'm a natural storyteller, what is the storytelling arc I want to do inside of that work to make it clear to myself first and clear to other people, this is what this is like. This is, this is this one, this is this one, this is how they combat with each other,
Right.
all under the pressures of, which is a really important part, because all of this happens inside of the pressure of the white gaze. And that's what makes this conversation really tough and really interesting,
Right.
because you're concerned about like, I don't want to look like the angry Black man, but I want to get, I really, really want to get somewhere and make sure that I'm seen as successful in the world of white people and success. But it's all from this outside perspective of a people group that's not your own. So you're combating each other while also being worried about this third entity the entire time, right? So I'm like, I see stage images, I see kind of like movement ideas, but again, it's just things, I like to just lay things down for a while so they work themselves out.
Yeah. Well, you can be the rock or you can be the river, but you can't be both. But then you think about the rock affects the river,
right?
And the river affects the rock.
Exactly.
Upon each other.
Exactly.
Not necessarily in negative ways. And in some ways, just neutral ways.
Right.
Not negative.
And the fact that they need each other. And I think that's what's the most interesting part, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I will always say, and folks will disagree, I'm not sure we would celebrate Martin if Malcolm was never around. If there was never a perceived lesser of the two evils, I'm not sure Martin's way of things would be as celebrated as they are today. So they needed each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating.
Well, gentlemen, I don't know how you've done it, but you've ended exactly on time. But
we've worked this out before.
Yeah, we don't.
This has never happened. I want to just thank you both so much, not only for giving your time today, and your insight and your thoughts on the world that we're inhabiting, but also for providing a space for other people to listen to conversations about race, and do it from a place of also looking at Akron through that lens right now. I think it is important. And David, your point about what is the action, what is going to come out of this that will enact actual change? Is it going to be the very necessary labeling of racism as a public health crisis? Is it going to be something, is that the start and not the end? So I really appreciate you talking. I would listen to you guys all day, and I have a feeling the people in Facebook land would as well. But thank you both so much for being here. Any closing thoughts before anything you want to share out to the audience? I know, David, we have a book we can expect to read, and now I think we're all going to be interested in the chapter on Cincinnati, certainly now.
Yeah. Barnstorming Ohio to Understand America is the title. It comes out August 25th. One quick thing I want to say that goes back to what I said before about Akron being the size where you can kind of see how it operates. I think we also have an opportunity now, and as we've had before, to take an action that you can see its effect here. That again, we're large enough to have a system that looks like what a big city looks like, but also nimble enough to be able to do something that could be a template. And I think the example of Cincinnati to us to see how one city didn't just react but decided to take action, and we got something out of it. So, and I also just want to thank you. We didn't know this was going to be the conversation today.
No.
And it's made me think about a lot, and I'm so thankful to have had the opportunity to hear Dominic on this subject. It wouldn't have happened if we hadn't planned to talk about something completely different. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and
which would have still been interesting. I'm sorry. I was also interested in that topic, but I think to not have this conversation would have been missing. Dominic, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, no, and I think that one of my final thoughts is that I'm taking away from this is the idea of like information into meaning is something that's really staying with me, but also this idea of like, be okay with questioning the narrative of yourself, be okay with question and be okay with what that's going to dig up, going back to like dig down to the deepest part. And then once you get to the deepest part, start the healing process. Don't get halfway down, because then there's a whole part we're missing, right? Let's be willing to do that individually. Let's be willing to do that as organizations. Let's be willing to do that as a city. And I think I challenge us, to David's point, because we can see how change happens in the city. I challenge us to lead in that way as a city. Yeah. And do the things that are uncomfortable, and do the things that might seem a bit revolutionary to other cities. Because actual change is a narrow road. It's really easy to get into proximity of it, but to actually get on the road itself, it's going to cost you everything and nothing at the same time.
Yeah. And you have to be bold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we have that capacity in Akron, and I hope that I will take your challenge seriously, Dominic. And since you're also on my board, you can hold me accountable in all sorts of ways. But I hope that the folks watching as well do that, digging down, allowing ourselves to own the parts of us that are ugly and contributing, especially as white people, and what we're going to do about that, I think is important. So, gentlemen, I truly appreciate your time today. Dominic and I were talking about who we might, talk to, and I always enjoy hearing from Dominic, but David, I couldn't have picked a better partner for him. So once we are all able to emerge again safely, it sounds like Book and Baby might be arriving around the same time. There would be a chance, and we're all close enough that we'll have to get together for some safe social distancing and meet Baby again.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone who is watching on Facebook. Thank you so much for tuning in. And David and Dominic, truly thank you for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.